In Fallout, and then in Fallout New Vegas in particular, we really wanted to have sort of a lot of groups that people could interact with.
Factions are really important to us. We didn't want to make it something where it was black and white, where you have this small group of good people against a small group of bad people. It's this very complex mixture of these different people and these different factions.
The player has a lot of control over what he gets to do in the New Vegas area. He gets to influence what happens to an entire region, and in order to have that kind of influence, he needs to side with one of the factions and sort of decide where he tips the balance.
It's all about war, and that's what Fallouts have been about, is war, and so how we're really showing that is war between these factions.
We want the player to sort of have that hesitation when they're like, where do I really stand with these organizations? Like, is it really the right thing to back X, Y, or Z? And even if I go off on my own, what does that mean for everyone who's living in the world of New Vegas?
We have three primary factions, one of which is the New California Republic.
Which is this big, sprawling government that's gotten too big for its own good. It's so big, it can't control its own territories, it can't police its own laws, it certainly can't protect its own citizens.
We felt it was really important to include the New California Republic because that was a faction that was developed in some of the earlier titles.
NCR is established after the events of Fallout 1 and has a major presence in Fallout 2. And in Fallout 3, they're like a early 20th century United States frontier government. They're pushing eastward, trying to soak up as many resources as they can, annex as much territory as possible.
It's basically a nascent nation state. It is doing its best to resurrect this idea of representative government. It's also, at the same time, a corrupt bureaucracy.
On the other hand, approaching from the east, looking to lock horns of the New California Republic, is this huge army of slavers called Caesar's Legion.
Which is this terrifying war band of slaves that has come from out of the Grand Canyon area that is just conquering everything in its path.
I just like this idea that we've been able to kind of take this Road Warrior-esque feeling and make it Roman.
These guys have this armor that is built out of football pads and catcher's gear and stuff like that, but it kind of looks like Roman lorica segmentata, which is the traditional armor of the Roman legions.
And the guy who runs it, Caesar, he's just in it for, I want to rule the world.
And Caesar is hardcore about using certain aspects of the Roman Empire as a model.
I think it's a really cool organization just visually to deal with, and then also once you get into the nuances of their culture, it's a kind of interesting thing. NCR and Caesar's Legion are sort of stalemated at the Colorado River and at Hoover Dam.
Hoover Dam is one of our signature locations in the game, and to be honest, it's what everyone is fighting over. It's still able to provide power for part of the region, which is its big draw.
NCR controls the dam, but Caesar is right across from it. And everyone thinks that they're just gearing up for a big assault.
Time is fast approaching when my legion will assault the Great Dam and invade the West.
NCR troops are coming into the area. Caesar's Legion is being reinforced from the east, and everyone's just wondering, like, well, when is somebody going to do something? And of course, that's where you come in, is because you kind of help determine when this showdown happens. Of course, Mr. House is playing into it as well, because Mr. House doesn't want NCR to win, ultimately, because he doesn't want them to take control of the Strip.
But that's not going to happen, because you're going to work for me.
The general idea is that we have the three major factions, Mr. House, NCR, and Caesar's Legion, but then there are all these sub-factions like the Great Khans, the Powder Gangs, the Kings, the Boomers, the Followers of the Apocalypse, and the player can go to those groups and try to shift alliances.
There are literally 125,000 factions in Fallout New Vegas. We're probably gonna have to cut some of them. There's the NCR, there's Caesar's Legion, there's the PTA, Mickey Mouse Club, Alcoholics Anonymous is in there right now.
Each of the factions has their own style about them. Like the Rangers have a very distinctive style in terms of the Dusters, and the Chairmen, the gang that runs the Tops, you know, they have a very Rat Pack kind of feel about how they dress. We've actually leveraged that in the game mechanics too, in terms of if you actually wear those outfits in the game, people will recognize you as members of those factions and either fortunately or unfortunately react accordingly.
One feature we've added for Fallout New Vegas is the concept of being able to disguise yourself as a member of a faction, even if you're working against them, so you can put on like a military uniform and sneak into a military base.
We wanted to make the player feel like The factions were well-grounded, they had very believable motivations.
We want the player to experience those factions. We want them to know what politics are at stake and what ideologies these organizations represent.
So when they choose what factions they want to work with, it's based on something more than just a gut, they're good, they're evil reaction. So if you support Caesar, or if you support NCR, or if you help the great Khans or the kings, it's going to make a big difference. You can decide, you know what, I don't think any of you are really particularly well suited to be running this place, so I'm going to fix that. That's where you essentially are either the active champion of Vegas, or you basically just said, it's anarchy now.